I need to tell this straight, because every time I try to soften it, my mind fills in the gaps with things worse than what actually happened. There were 4 of us when we found Blackwater. Me, Caleb, Morgan, and Tish. We weren't ghost hunters or YouTubers chasing clout, or dumb enough to go looking for haunted places just for the thrill of it. At least that's what I told myself afterward. Truth was, we were exactly the kind of people bad stories happen to. Young enough to mistake curiosity for caution. Old enough to think we were smarter than whatever waited in the dark. We'd gone hiking in the Appalachian backcountry along an old, half-forgotten game trail that started behind a hunting supply store outside Ransom Gap. The old man who sold us jerky and rain ponchos had told us not to cut west once we reached the second ridge. Don't follow old roads that ain't on your map, he'd said. Caleb laughed and asked him why. The old man shrugged like he didn't care if we listened. Because sometimes they lead to places folks forgot for a reason. We laughed too. That was around 11 in the morning, full daylight, blue sky. Mountain air so clean it stung your lungs. Everything ordinary enough to make you trust the day. By 3, we found the road. It wasn't on Caleb's GPS, and it sure as hell wasn't on the paper topo map Morgan carried in a plastic sleeve. It came out of the trees at a weird angle, old and nearly swallowed by earth. Cracked blacktop running between banks of laurel and pine. Grass had pushed through it in thick green veins. Rusted guard posts leaned like broken teeth. It looked less like a road than a thing that had been buried and was slowly coming back up. Tish was the first to say it. This used to go somewhere. She stood with one hand shading her eyes, looking downhill where the road vanished through the trees. She was always the practical one, nurse in training, level head, the kind of person who brought an actual first aid kit instead of a few band-aids and a prayer. Caleb grinned. Then let's find out where. Morgan frowned. We should stay on trail. But even she was looking. That was the thing about Blackwater, though we didn't know its name yet. It didn't pull you the way stories say cursed places do. No whispering in your head, no magic. It was simpler and worse than that. It was just there, waiting to be noticed. And once you noticed it, it became hard to turn away. The road sloped down the mountainside in broad switchbacks. The farther we followed it, the stranger everything got. We started seeing cut stumps, old growth logging, decades gone gray with weather, then ditches lined with stone, then power poles with wires hanging loose like dead vines. There were signs too, most of them face down in the weeds, but one still stood crooked by the roadside. Blackwater Timber Co., authorized personnel only. The lettering had faded almost white. Below it, someone had scratched something into the metal with what looked like a nail or a knife. The dust got in. Morgan read it aloud and laughed nervously. Caleb said, "Okay, that's creepy." I said, "Probably kids." But the words stuck with me. The mountain opened up not long after that, and the town appeared below us, in a bowl of shadow between the ridges. Not a big place. Maybe 3 streets, a church, a row of company houses, a general store, a water tower with Blackwater painted on it in peeling letters, and beyond all that, the mill itself, a sprawling mass of blackened timber buildings, corrugated roofs, loading platforms, conveyors, silos, and one tall smokestack like a finger pointing nowhere. It looked abandoned, not the pretty kind of abandoned you see in photographs, with ivy and sunlight and poetic decay. Blackwater looked left, dropped, like whoever had lived there stepped away in the middle of a sentence and never came back to finish it. No cars, no voices, no smoke. The place sat under the afternoon light like a dead thing too stubborn to rot. Holy hell, Caleb said softly. Tish looked at the houses. This isn't on any map. Nope, Morgan said. I remember a breeze crossing the overlook then, bringing with it a smell from down in the hollow. Wet wood, rust, something powdery and old, like a basement that had stayed shut too long. That should have been enough. See the ghost town, take a couple pictures, leave before dark. Instead, Caleb said, "We camp here." Tish turned to him. "Seriously? Come on," he said. "Tell me this isn't the coolest thing we've stumbled onto in our lives." Morgan hesitated. "We'd have to head back now to make the trail before dark." "We've got tents," Caleb said. "We've got food, and there's probably some flat ground by the mill pond." I should tell you I objected. I sort of did. I said something like, I don't know, man, which is not the same thing as saying no. Tish objected the most, but even she got worn down after a few minutes. We were tired, and the idea of exploring a lost logging town before heading out in the morning felt too good, too strange, too rare. So we went down. The main street was wider than I expected, gravel over blacktop, old storefronts with boarded windows and sagging awnings, a barber pole stiff with rust, a hardware store, the general store, its door hanging open a few inches. No birds. That's one of the details I keep returning to. In the mountains, there's always birds, always insects, always some living sound tucked in the trees. But Blackwater had this muffled quality to it, like the whole hollow was holding its breath. Even our footsteps seemed swallowed. The houses stood in neat rows beyond the store, each with a porch, each with curtains or what was left of them. Toys lay scattered in one yard, sun-bleached blocks, a little tin truck, the cracked shell of a ball. One porch swing moved slightly as we passed, though there wasn't enough wind for it. Caleb noticed and said, "Probably just old springs." Nobody answered. We split up for a while, but only in pairs. Morgan and Tish checked the houses closest to the church. Caleb and I headed toward the mill. Up close, it was huge, bigger than it had looked from the ridge. There were loading bays large enough for rail cars, stacks of cut timber fossilized gray with age, rusted chain mechanisms, and one low warehouse attached to a concrete annex with warning placards still bolted to the wall. The annex door was half open. "See?" Caleb said. "This is amazing." "Yeah," I said, though my voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. Inside, the air changed. Cooler. Stiller. It carried a dry taste that clung to the back of my throat. Sunlight lanced through cracks high in the wall and showed slow-moving motes drifting in the dark. At first, I thought it was normal dust. Then my flashlight beam hit the floor and I saw the spill. A white powder lay across the concrete, in long ridged drifts, piled beneath split paper sacks and a burst metal hopper. It had gone clumpy with age in some places, but in others it still looked almost soft, like fresh flour. Boot tracks crisscrossed it, hundreds maybe, going every direction, in and out, back and forth. Not old impressions either. The edges were too sharp. I crouched down. Caleb said, "Don't touch it." I'm not gonna touch it. There were labels on the torn sacks, but they were too damaged to make out more than a few letters. Trial, treatment, particulate. And in red, "Do not inhale." That was enough for me. "We should go," I said. Caleb nodded, but not in that serious way people do when they actually mean it. He nodded like somebody indulging a nervous friend. "Yeah, probably not healthy." Then he shined his light farther in and said, "What the hell?" The wall beyond the spill was covered in handprints. White handprints, smeared and layered over one another, reaching up the concrete as high as a grown man could stretch. Some were small enough to be children's. The prints trailed toward an interior door hanging crooked on one hinge. We both stood there listening, and from somewhere beyond that door, way down inside the mill, came a sound so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. A single knock, not loud, not dramatic, just wood against wood, like somebody shifting in a room. Caleb looked at me. I looked at him. Then, because fear makes idiots of people, we backed out laughing. We found the others in front of the church just before sunset. Morgan had a stack of old company records she'd found in the rectory office, most of them mildewed beyond reading. Tish had a face on her I didn't like at all. "What?" I asked. She looked back at the houses. I found plates on a table, food still on them. "That's impossible," Caleb said. "It wasn't fresh," she snapped. "I'm saying it looked like people left during dinner." There were cups, coats by the door, a crib in one room. Morgan held up a ledger she'd saved. I found something too. We sat on the church steps while the light bled out of the hollow. She opened the ledger carefully. The pages crackled. It was payroll, mostly, then supply orders. Then the handwriting changed near the end. Neater at first, then hurried. "Read this," Morgan said. She handed it to me. The entry was dated October 14, 1978. Shipment received from Knoxville facility. Additive to reduce spoilage and insect bloom in stockpiles. Mill foreman says masks recommended during application, but not necessary in open air. Men complain of irritation in eyes and throat. Several townsfolk report unusual fatigue. Night shifts agitated. Another a week later. Doctor from county delayed. Spill in storage annex contained. Manager insists no need to alert state inspectors. Church attendance down. Some of the women say husbands won't come to bed before dawn. Then the last entry, written hard enough to tear the page. They keep gathering at the mill after sundown. They say they can smell each other in the dark. Kids too. God forgive us for keeping this quiet. We should have burned the place when we had the chance. Nobody spoke for a while. The sun slid behind the ridge, and I swear to you the whole town changed. Not visibly at first, it just seemed to settle. The shadows between buildings thickened quicker than they should have. The tree line around the hollow went from green-black to pitch. The air turned colder with a suddenness that didn't feel natural. Somewhere metal creaked. Somewhere else came a soft, distant, dragging sound. Tish stood up. Nope, we are not staying. That should have been the end of it. But by then, dusk had gone faster than any of us realized. Hiking back up an unfamiliar road and then trying to pick up the trail through the mountain in the dark felt stupid. Caleb argued it. Morgan half agreed. I didn't want to stay, but I also didn't want to break an ankle on a ridge 2 miles from nowhere. So we compromised in the worst way possible. We camped near the edge of town, in a patch of ground between the church and the general store, telling ourselves we'd leave at first light. We made no fire. None of us said that was because we didn't want to draw attention, but that was why. By full dark, the town was a different country. The moon never reached the bottom of that hollow. It sat somewhere above the ridges, whitening the tops of trees while the streets below drowned in shadow. Our little battery lantern felt weak and embarrassed. Every building around us looked inhabited in the dark, even with busted windows and dead porches. It was like the emptiness had shape. At around 9, we started hearing them. Footsteps. Not close. Somewhere down near the mill. A slow collective shuffling. Uneven and ninny. Sometimes it would stop for long stretches, and then start again from a different direction. Once came the slam of a door, once a burst of something that almost sounded like laughter, except it was too flat and wrong. Like somebody remembering what laughter was supposed to sound like, without understanding why people did it. Nobody slept. Caleb tried to make jokes. Tish told him to shut up. Morgan sat with the ledger in her lap like it was a Bible. Around 11, the church bell rang. Just once. A heavy iron note rolled out over Blackwater and died in the trees. I think all 4 of us stopped breathing. Then, from the houses around us, came movement. Curtains twitching in windows. Porch boards creaking. Soft impacts inside walls, as if people were bumping gently into furniture while they found their feet. Tish whispered, "Oh my God, Caleb killed the lantern." We sat in absolute dark, hearing the town wake up. There are sounds the human body knows before the mind can process them. A foot dragging over gravel, fingernails brushing wood, wet breathing where no breathing should be, the click of a jaw working too slowly. Something moved across the street, then another thing. Moonlight touched them just enough to show shapes. People, dozens, maybe more. Walking in no hurry at all, drifting between the houses toward the mill road and back again as if following routines their bodies remembered long after their minds had gone bad. They were not dead, that's important. I could see that much even then. Not corpses, not skeletons, not movie monsters. They were townspeople ruined by time and whatever that powder had done to them. Their skin had a pale, dusted look, as if flour had settled into every crease and pore. Hair hung in clumps. Clothes were ancient company denim. Nightgowns, church shirts, union jackets, children's coats grown too small on long, thinned bodies. Their movements were jerky but purposeful. They twitched when they stopped, shoulders hitching, heads tilting like they were listening to something underneath the ground. And every now and then, one of them would lift its face and breathe the air in long, rattling pulls through the nose, searching, smelling. I pressed myself flatter behind the low stone church wall and felt Morgan's nails digging into my arm. Caleb was on my left, shaking. Tish had one hand over her mouth. A little boy crossed the street 10 feet away. Couldn't have been older than 8 when whatever happened happened. He wore suspenders and one shoe. His face was powder white except where tears had once cut tracks through it. His eyes were open too wide, the whites cloudy in the dark. He moved with small, abrupt steps, head cocked, sniffing like an animal. He stopped right in front of us. I thought that was it. I really did. He stood there so still, I could hear something faint inside him, a dry crackle every time he inhaled. Then he turned his head toward the mill, like someone had called his name, and hurried off into the dark. The church door creaked open behind us. Not wide, just enough to sound. Tish jerked so hard she hit the wall. Across the street, 3 of the townspeople stopped and looked our way. Their faces were wrong in the moonlight, not with rot, with vacancy. Like all the things that made them human had been thinned down and buried under some simple need. Their nostrils flared. One of them was a woman in a house dress holding a lantern that wasn't lit. Powder coated her hair so thick she looked old enough to be carved from ash. She took one step toward us, then another. Caleb whispered, "Run." We bolted. Everything after that came in pieces, us tearing around the side of the church. Tish tripping over a root and slamming her knee on stone. Morgan grabbing her under the arm. Shapes appearing in the dark ahead of us, workers in bib overalls. A man with half his face hidden under a logging helmet. A woman still wearing an apron. All of them turning at once as if catching our scent on the wind. Then the sound they made when they realized we were there. Not a scream, not a moan. A sharp, excited inhalation, a whole town breathing in. And then they came. Fast. That was the worst part. They could shamble, yes. But when they knew where you were, they moved in bursts, violent, stuttering rushes. Like marionettes yanked by a mean child. Arms reaching, hands clawing, feet hammering porches and gravel. We ran for the general store because it was the closest building with the door still attached. Caleb hit it first, shoulder checking it open. We stumbled inside and slammed it behind us just as bodies struck the other side. The whole frame jumped. Dark store, dusty shelves, smell of mold and old sugar. Morgan dropped the bar latch into place and screamed. We shoved the display rack over just as fists began pounding from outside. Not fists, hands, lots of hands. The wood thudded and trembled. Glass cracked somewhere near the front windows. Tish had blood running down her shin from where she'd cut it outside. Caleb was gasping, "What the hell are they?" Nobody answered because nobody knew. Then from the rear of the store came another sound, a dragging footstep. We turned our lights as one. There was an old man standing in the stockroom doorway. He wore a stained white shirt and suspenders, and one eye was milk white with cataract. Powder was caked around his mouth and nostrils. He held a butcher knife in one hand, not raised to attack, but hanging loose at his side, like he'd forgotten what it was for. He sniffed, saw us, and smiled. Not mean, not happy either. Just some warped reflex of friendliness stretched across a face that didn't know how to be a face anymore. Then he opened his mouth and let out a shrill whistling cry. The pounding at the front door tripled. Caleb grabbed a soup can off the shelf and hurled it. It struck the old man in the forehead. Didn't drop him, but it knocked him sideways long enough for us to run for the back. He lunged as we passed. The knife caught Morgan's jacket and sliced into her shoulder just enough to open skin. She screamed. Tish slammed a broom handle into his chest and sent him into a rack of canned goods. The whole shelving unit toppled. We burst through the rear door into an alley choked with weeds. More shapes were moving behind the buildings now, drawn by that whistle. Lanterns, some lit, some dark, bobbed in the night like low swamp stars. The townspeople weren't mindless. That scared me more than if they had been. They were coordinating, herding, using the streets to cut us off. "The mill," Caleb yelled. "Why the mill?" I shouted back. "Because that's where they're all coming from." It was insane. So naturally we did it. We ran downhill through Blackwater with the whole dead not dead town waking behind us. through yards littered with children's toys, past the company houses where silhouettes watched from porches, past the water tower and a rusted truck sinking into mud. The air filled with that dry powder smell, stronger the closer we got to the mill, until every breath tasted like chalk and pennies. I heard things during that run I still hear some nights. A woman calling, a man shouting, a child laughing from somewhere too near my ear. They still had language, you see, bits and scraps of themselves, enough to make it worse. The mill yard opened before us in a black spread of concrete and gravel. Buildings loomed overhead, huge and angular. Conveyor belts hung like broken spines. Wind hissed through slats and gaps, making the place sound full of whispers. We ducked into the main saw building because there was nowhere else to go. Inside was machinery the size of houses, circular blades taller than I was, log tracks, chains, feed roller, everything dead and silent and looming. Our lights swung over warning signs and rusted control panels. The floor was layered in sawdust, turned black with age. Behind us, the townspeople entered the yard. We could hear them outside, many more than before. Not just a few dozen, maybe all of Blackwater. A whole lost population threading through the dark, surrounding the mill with patient little noises. Feet scraping, coughing, low voices muttering to one another in fragments. Something moved on the catwalk above us, then another something. White dust drifted down in a faint veil. I shined my light up and caught 3 workers standing on the overhead walkway, looking down between the railings. Their faces glowed pale in the beam. One wore a foreman's hard hat with a lamp still strapped to the front. Another had no lower lip. His teeth showed all the time like he was grinning. The third was a woman with a braid down her back and an infant's tiny sock pinned to her shirt. The foreman spoke in a voice dry as leaves. Night shift. Then they came over the railing. Not climbing, dropping. Their bodies hit the old conveyor with wet, bone-heavy thumps and kept moving. We ran again, deeper this time, through the heart of the mill, chasing our own light. We passed stacks of rotted paperwork, locker rooms with rusted lunch tins still inside, a break room with coffee cups fused to the table by time. In one corridor, every wall was smeared white from shoulder height down, as if generations of people had walked it brushing their hands along both sides. It led us back to the storage annex, the spill room. The powder on the floor looked disturbed now, as though many bodies had crossed it recently. And at the center of the room stood a shape larger than the others. A man, massively built even after age and ruin had hollowed him. Logging coat, steel toe boots, beard gone chalk white with dust. One side of his face was scarred as if by chemical burns. Around his neck hung an ID badge turned backward on its cord. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, breathing in shallow, dry pulls. Outside the room, the others gathered in doorways and halls, not rushing us, waiting. The big man slowly turned his badge around. Harlan Voss, plant manager. When he spoke, powder puffed from his lips. You breathed it? Nobody moved. Voss took one step forward, boots whispering in the powder. We stayed. His eyes, God, those eyes were not dead. That would have been mercy. There was thought in them, trapped under layers of compulsion and whatever damage that chemical had done. Enough to know, enough to remember. It got in the houses, he said, in the church, in the school. Men brought it home on boots and cuffs. Children played in it. We shut the road, told county we was relocating, told him company folded, easier that way. Behind him, the workers and townspeople crowded the hall, silent, listening. Morgan said, "Why can't you come out in the day?" He gave a strange twitching shrug. Sun hurts, dries us, night's kinder. Then he smiled a little, and I saw the powder packed into his gums. We do all right at night, Tish said. What is this stuff? His face changed at that. Something like old rage flickered through. Improvement, they called it. Cheap miracle. Keep pests out the wood. Keep rot from the grain. Keep profits up. Masks recommended but not needed. That's how they said it. His fingers opened and closed. Powder sifted from the creases. We were company all the way down to the bone. Company houses. Company church. Company graves. So when the dust got in us, he glanced behind him at the people in the hall. Where were we supposed to go? I wish I could tell you we pitied him then. Maybe some part of me did. Then Caleb coughed, just once. But in that room, with powder hanging in the air and all those pale faces watching, that tiny sound was enough. Every head turned toward him. Voss's nostrils widened. I saw it happen, the instant the man lost control to whatever lived in the dust. His mouth parted, his shoulders jerked, and from every throat in the hallway came the same hungry, dry inhale. "Run!" I shouted. Voss lunged. Caleb jumped back but slipped in the powder. The manager hit him hard enough to crack the concrete with both of them. Tish and I grabbed at Voss, pulling, kicking, screaming. He was monstrously strong, Caleb yelled, as Voss's fingers dug into his face and hair. Trying not to kill him, I think, but to drag his mouth close enough to breathe him in. Morgan did the thing that saved all of us. She snatched up one of the torn chemical sacks from the spill and shoved it over Voss's head. He reeled back, clawing at the paper. Powder burst everywhere. The hallway people surged. I grabbed Caleb under one arm, Tish took the other, and Morgan hauled us through the interior door as the room behind us exploded in a frenzy of coughing bodies and scraping feet. Voss was roaring inside the sack, stumbling blind into his own people. They piled over one another, trying to reach us. We ran through a machine bay toward a service stair. Halfway up, the steps shook under the weight of bodies climbing after us. At the top was a catwalk leading to the old loading tower. Beyond the tower, maybe 20 feet away, was the roof of an adjacent maintenance shed lower than the platform. Not safe, not smart, but possible. We pounded across the catwalk while hands reached through the grating from below. One caught my boot and I kicked free so hard I left the lace behind. Morgan was crying openly now, not from panic, but from pain. One arm hanging useless, with blood soaking her sleeve. Tish limped from the hit she'd taken outside. Caleb's cheek had 4 bleeding grooves down it, where Voss had clawed him. We reached the loading tower just as the catwalk behind us filled with workers. The first one through was the woman with the braid. She rushed us with a speed that didn't match the ruin of her body. Tish swung her metal flashlight like a club and smashed it into the woman's temple. She toppled sideways through the railing and vanished into the dark below without a scream. Caleb didn't hesitate. He climbed the outer rail, looked once at the shed roof, and jumped. He landed badly, rolled, almost slid off, then caught himself. "Come on," Morgan went next. I held her good arm while she climbed the rail and all but fell across the gap. She hit hard, cried out, but stayed on the roof. The catwalk shuddered. The workers were almost on us. Tish pushed me toward the rail. "Go, no, go, damn it." I jumped. For one floating second, the whole mill spread out beneath me. Black roofs, skeletal conveyors, pale faces lifting from the yard. And then I crashed onto corrugated metal so hard it drove all air from me. My forearm scraped open. I rolled into Morgan. Caleb caught me before I slid. I turned in time to see Tish, still on the tower, backpedaling from 2 workers and a little girl in a church dress. The girl moved fastest, all twitching limbs and open mouth. Tish kicked her square in the chest, then climbed the rail backward and jumped without looking. She clipped the edge of the shed roof with one hip, and I heard the impact over everything else. But Caleb and I grabbed her wrists and dragged her up as workers swarmed the tower above us. Then came the sound that saved us again. A horn. Long, low, mechanical. Not from the mill, from beyond town. A truck horn. Every pale face in Blackwater turned toward the road. For one impossible second, the whole town froze, listening. Then the church bell began ringing in the distance. Not once this time, but over and over. Frantic and wild. The townspeople answered with a collective cry and started moving away from us. Not all. Some stayed. But many of them turned from the mill and streamed uphill through Blackwater toward the sound of that truck horn, drawn by fresh life, fresh breath. Caleb stared. Who the hell? The answer hit me at once. The old road. Someone had come down it at night. Maybe a hunter, maybe a deputy, maybe some fool like us. We never found out, because the next thing that happened was the maintenance shed roof giving way under our combined weight, The metal screamed and dropped. We crashed through rotten beams into darkness, landing in a shower of splinters and rust. I blacked out for maybe a second, maybe less. When I came to, everything hurt. My shoulder, my ribs, my head. Tish was groaning beside me. Morgan was trying to breathe through sobs. Caleb was already at the far wall, kicking at a half-jammed service door. Outside, the town howled. Not like people. Not even like animals. Like 100 throats trying to remember how to be human and failing all at once. Caleb got the door open, and moonlight slashed in. We stumbled out into a ravine behind the mill where runoff had eaten a narrow cut through the earth. The slope beyond led up into the trees, steep, muddy, thick with roots. But it led away, so we climbed. I don't remember most of that climb clearly, just hands grabbing wet leaves, boots slipping, branches whipping our faces. Morgan nearly passed out twice. Tish's leg kept buckling. Caleb and I basically dragged him the last stretch. Behind us, through the trees, lanterns floated in the dark hollow. Voices called from below. At one point I looked down and saw Harlan Voss standing at the edge of the mill yard, tiny with distance but unmistakable. He did not follow us into the trees. None of them did. They stayed in Blackwater and along the road, pacing like wolves at the edge of territory. By dawn, we were 3 ridges away. We found a fire road near noon and flagged down a forestry truck. The driver took one look at us, filthy, bleeding, half crazy, and got on the radio. We told the sheriff what we could. He listened. Deputies went out that afternoon with a county hazmat team and 2 state troopers. They found the old road blocked by a rock slide that hadn't been there when we went in. That was their first report. Their second said there was no town beyond it. Just overgrown grade and scattered foundations too collapsed to identify. No mill, no church, no water tower, nothing. That's the official story anyway. Stress, exposure, group panic. We got lost in the backcountry and frightened ourselves in the ruins of some old industrial site. The cuts and bruises came from a fall. Morgan's shoulder from debris. Caleb's face from exposed wire or sheet metal. They explained everything except what mattered. Except for the white powder they found in the cuffs of our clothes. Except for the chemical burns on Caleb's cheek that took months to heal. Except for the fact that for weeks afterward, all 4 of us woke choking in the middle of the night because we could smell dry dust in rooms that had been cleaned top to bottom. We don't hike together anymore. Hell, we barely talk. Morgan moved out west and refuses to discuss any of it. Tish sleeps with blackout curtains and 3 locks on her bedroom door. Caleb drinks too much and calls me sometimes around 2 or 3 in the morning just to ask if I hear it too. Because some nights, when the air is damp and the wind comes down from the high ridges just right, people in the towns around Ransom Gap still hear strange things after dark. A distant bell. Truck horns where there are no roads. The sound of many feet moving in old company rhythm. And now, sometimes, something else. A knocking. Not loud. Just wood against wood. Like somebody shifting in a room. 3 nights ago, I found a white handprint on the outside of my bedroom window. I live 70 miles from where Blackwater should have been. I told myself it was a prank. Dirt, paint, anything. Then I leaned close and saw tiny grains sparkling in it. Powder. Last night, Caleb called me at 1:17 a.m. and said there were people standing under the streetlight across from his apartment. Men in work coats, a woman holding a dark lantern, a little boy in one shoe. He said they weren't doing anything, just standing there, breathing. Then he whispered they found the road out, and the line went dead. This is Horror Story Society, and you made it to the end. If you felt that chill, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.